My name is Grace Holloway, and I am 35 years old. The first laugh came from my father. The second came from my sister's friends. My mother did not laugh. She smiled, which hurt more. Grace owns a little cleaning service, she told the groom's family, lifting her wine glass as if she were apologizing for a stain. My father leaned back and added, "Let's not dress it up. She's a cleaning lady." The engagement dinner went quiet. Then several guests chuckled because they thought they had permission. I kept my hands folded beneath the table. They had no idea that the little service employed more than 100 people, handled hospital contamination emergencies across 3 states, and had just completed the most dangerous contract of my career. They also had no idea who had signed that contract. Across from me, the groom's mother stopped mid-sip. Her hand tightened around her glass. She stared at my face, then at the silver Aegis pin on my dress. My sister noticed first. "Is something wrong?" she asked. The woman did not answer. She pushed back her chair, crossed the room, and studied me as if a photograph had stepped into real life. Then she leaned close and whispered 3 words. My mother's smile vanished. My father lowered his glass, and my sister, who had spent the evening making me the family joke, realized she had humiliated me in front of the one family who knew exactly what I was worth. Before I tell you what happened after those 3 words, tell me where you are watching from and what the weather is like there. I want to know how far my story can travel tonight. 3 hours before that silence, I had nearly declined the invitation. The engagement dinner was being held inside the Hawthorne Conservatory, a restored glass house outside Charlotte that normally hosted charity auctions and political fundraisers. My younger sister, Chloe Holloway, had chosen it because her fiancé's family funded half the botanical foundation attached to it. Chloe was 31, polished, camera-ready, and newly promoted to communications director at Vail and Mercer, a luxury real estate firm. Our mother, Diane, treated every line on Chloe's resume like a family medal. Our father, Martin, treated every line on mine like a misunderstanding. I was the founder and chief executive of Aegis Environmental Response, a company specializing in hospital decontamination, hazardous material containment, clean room recovery, and emergency sanitation after floods, fires, and infectious outbreaks. We entered buildings other companies evacuated and trained beside infection control physicians and industrial hygienists. We had 126 employees, 5 mobile response units, and contracts in North Carolina, Virginia, and Tennessee. Still, to my parents, I cleaned for a living. I had built Aegis after watching a nursing home flood during a tropical storm when I was 26. The water had looked harmless, only ankle deep, but it carried sewage, mold spores, medication residue, and enough bacteria to shut down an entire wing. I was working for a restoration contractor then, and I saw executives argue over liability while nurses carried elderly residents through contaminated hallways. I organized a makeshift containment plan and later spent 2 weeks sick because the company had issued the wrong protective equipment. That experience cost me part of my hearing in one ear, ended a relationship with a man who said I cared more about emergencies than a future with him, and emptied the savings I used to launch Aegis. I slept on an air mattress in my first office for 6 months. I sold my car to make payroll. When our first major hospital contract came through, I celebrated alone with vending machine coffee because my family had gone to Chloe's award dinner. The clearest memory, though, came from a country club luncheon 2 years later. My mother had introduced Chloe to a table of women as the daughter who made something of herself. When one of them asked about me, Diane lowered her voice and said, "Grace sanitizes bathrooms. She is very independent." Then she slid my business card beneath her plate so no one would see it. I remember staring at her pearl bracelet and thinking, how can a mother be ashamed of the hands that paid her mortgage when my father was out of work? I had covered 4 months of their payments that year. Chloe never knew. Or perhaps she knew, and preferred not to ask. At the conservatory entrance, Chloe greeted me in a cream silk dress and hugged me just long enough for the photographer to capture it. "You came," she said, sounding surprised. Beside her stood Ethan Whitmore, her fiancé, an orthopedic surgeon with an easy smile and a habit of listening before he spoke. He introduced me to his parents, Robert and Evelyn Whitmore. Robert had built Whitmore Regional Medical from 2 community hospitals into a 14-hospital network. Evelyn chaired its foundation and oversaw patient safety initiatives. 6 months earlier, Aegis had handled a confidential contamination crisis inside their flagship oncology center. Because the incident involved pending litigation, every employee had signed a strict non-disclosure agreement. I had attended emergency video calls with Evelyn, but the connection had failed repeatedly, and most of my face had been hidden behind a respirator during the on-site inspection. I assumed she would not recognize me. She studied me for an extra second when we shook hands, then smiled politely. "Grace," she said, "I have a feeling we may have met before." Before I could answer, my mother appeared, looped her arm through Evelyn's, and said, "Not likely. Grace spends most of her time in work boots." The first dismissal of the evening landed softly. The others would not. The dinner began with champagne beneath rows of warm lights suspended between the conservatory's black iron beams. A string quartet played near the entrance while servers carried trays through clusters of guests who seemed to know exactly where they belonged. My mother moved from table to table presenting Chloe as if she were launching an expensive product. Communications director, future Whitmore, perfect hostess, the daughter who had always known how to make an impression. When she finally reached me, she rested a hand on my shoulder and said, "And this is Grace. She has always been good at practical things." Her tone made practical sound like a condition I had failed to overcome. One of Ethan's aunts asked what kind of practical work I did. Before I could answer, Chloe's maid of honor, Meredith Lane, knocked her elbow against a wineglass. Red wine spread across the white linen near my place setting. Diane laughed and immediately handed me a folded napkin. "Perfect timing. Grace is the expert." Meredith covered her mouth, but not quickly enough to hide her smile. 2 women beside her exchanged amused looks. I placed the napkin on the dry side of the table and signaled a server. "The expert knows not to grind tannin into linen," I said. "It sets the stain." The server thanked me and began blotting the spill properly. Evelyn Whitmore watched the exchange without laughing. Her eyes moved from my mother to me, then lingered on the silver shield pin fastened near the neckline of my dress. During the first course, Evelyn asked whether I worked in facilities management. I explained that Aegis Environmental Response designed containment protocols and handled regulated decontamination for hospitals, laboratories, pharmaceutical manufacturers, and industrial sites. "We are usually called when a building cannot safely remain open," I said. She leaned forward with genuine interest. "Do you manage airborne isolation failures too? Negative pressure zones, HEPA verification, fungal remediation?" "All of those," I replied. "We also handle cleanroom recovery, chemical exposure, post-flood contamination, and emergency infection control support." Recognition sharpened in her expression, but before she could ask another question, Diane cut in. "Grace makes everything sound very scientific. At the end of the day, dirt is dirt." My father chuckled from the opposite side of the table. Chloe lifted her glass and added, "Mom, be nice." But she said it while smiling. It was the kind of defense that protected her image without protecting me. Was that kindness, or merely permission disguised as kindness? I had spent years asking myself versions of that question. Chloe rarely threw the first stone. She simply placed stones within everyone's reach, stepped backward, and acted surprised when someone used them. That evening, she had seated me between a distant cousin and one of the conservatory's support columns, far from the photographer and outside the central family grouping. Her co-workers occupied the best table beneath the floral installation. She had also left my company name off the printed family biographies placed beside every menu. Beneath my name, the card read, Grace Holloway, self-employed. Under Chloe's name were 3 lines detailing her promotion, awards, and charity committee work. Even Ethan's teenage cousin received a description of his university program. I had been reduced to a tax category. When I asked Chloe about it before dinner, she had claimed the printer must have shortened my information. There was limited space, she said. Yet there had been enough room to mention that her friend Meredith had chaired a dog rescue fundraiser. Halfway through the first course, Evelyn asked how many people worked for Aegis. 126 full-time employees, I said. More during regional emergencies. Diane turned toward me with open surprise. My parents had never asked how many people I employed. My father knew only that I was unavailable whenever he wanted help moving furniture or fixing something at their house. Evelyn continued asking about training, insurance, safety certification, and emergency mobilization. I explained that every field technician received paid hazardous material instruction, respirator fit testing, infection control education, and continuing certification. Aegis provided health insurance, counseling after traumatic deployments, and a hardship fund for employees facing medical emergencies. That is not a small operation, Robert Whitmore said from across the table. It sounds more complex than several hospital departments. Chloe took a slow drink of wine. Grace likes numbers, she replied. They make the business sound bigger. The comment was soft enough to appear playful and sharp enough to cut. I stared at her and wondered. If your family needs your success to remain small so they can remain comfortable, how much of yourself are you expected to erase? I still had not decided whether to answer aloud when Meredith mentioned that the dessert photographer wanted a picture of the bridesmaids. Chloe and her friends left the table, and I excused myself a few minutes later to take a call from an Aegis supervisor. The call ended before I reached the coat room, but I heard laughter around the corner. Meredith and 2 of Chloe's co-workers stood near a service corridor, crowded around a phone. I heard my name, followed by the phrase, Cinderella with a respirator. One woman asked whether my company uniform came with a personalized mop bucket. Another said my hands looked rough enough to sand furniture. Meredith noticed me and lowered the screen, but a notification appeared before she could lock it. The group chat was titled, Chloe's Inner Circle. A photograph of me entering the conservatory had been posted with a mop emoji, and the caption, Emergency cleanup arrived. Beneath it were jokes about my dress being rented, my hair looking surprisingly expensive, and whether the Whitmores understood that their future in-law came with industrial bleach. Chloe had replied with 3 laughing emojis. My father had written, At least the wedding cleanup will be free? Then I saw the message that hurt more than the rest. Diane Holloway had added, At least she finally dressed like management instead of the help. Meredith muttered that it was just a family joke and tried to put the phone into her purse. I did not grab it. I did not raise my voice. I smiled and asked her to send me the entrance photograph because the lighting made my dress look better than it did in person. Flustered and eager to prove there was no problem, she handed me the device. I forwarded the full conversation to myself, including the timestamps and participant list, then deleted the forwarding notification before returning the phone. The woman I had become understood evidence. You documented the damage before the people responsible could rename it humor. When I returned to the table, Chloe glanced at Meredith, then at me. She knew something had shifted, but she could not tell how much I had seen. Diane resumed smiling as if nothing had happened. My father asked whether I could give him a discount on mold removal at one of his rental properties, producing another round of laughter. I looked at each of them and realized they did not merely misunderstand my work. They depended on misunderstanding it. Their family hierarchy required Chloe to represent success and me to represent the embarrassing alternative. If I became too visible, the entire arrangement collapsed. Then Diane tapped her glass with a silver spoon and announced that the family toasts were about to begin. Chloe straightened in her chair. My father reached eagerly for the microphone, and I placed my phone face down beside my plate, knowing that every lie spoken during the next few minutes would already have evidence waiting beneath my hand. My father stood first. Martin loved a microphone because it allowed him to convert confidence into authority without earning either. He adjusted his jacket, waited until the servers stopped moving, and began praising Chloe's discipline, her taste, and her ability to rise above ordinary expectations. He spoke about how she had always wanted more from life, how she had refused to settle, and how proud he was that she had found a man whose family shared those values. Several guests nodded approvingly. Chloe lowered her eyes with practiced modesty. This was the same man who had borrowed $11,000 from me after a failed equipment resale venture, then avoided every conversation about repayment. He had also asked Aegis employees to repair water damage at his rental property, as a family favor. Yet he spoke about achievement as if he had invented it. He welcomed Ethan into what he called a family that has always respected hard work. I nearly laughed at the precision of the lie. Diane followed with a toast that sounded less like a mother's blessing and more like a campaign speech. She described Chloe as elegant, ambitious, socially gifted, and the daughter who never settled for an ordinary life. She looked directly at me when she said ordinary. The glance lasted less than a second, but I felt its entire history. Ethan's uncle, perhaps sensing something uncomfortable, tried to redirect the conversation by asking whether both Holloway sisters worked in communications. Diane answered before I could speak. "Oh no, Chloe is the professional one. Grace owns a little cleaning service." She delivered the sentence lightly, smiling as if she had made an affectionate family joke. Robert Whitmore turned toward me with interest rather than amusement. "Commercial facilities?" he asked. "Medical buildings?" I opened my mouth to explain. My father leaned toward the microphone and interrupted. "Let's not dress it up," he said, laughing into his wine. "She's a cleaning lady." That was the moment from the beginning of my story. The first laugh came from him. The next came from Chloe's friends, followed by several uncertain chuckles from guests who did not understand the joke, but feared being the only ones refusing to participate. Diane smiled into her glass. Chloe looked down at her plate, yet the faint curve at the corner of her mouth betrayed her. She was enjoying a victory she intended to deny later. My hands remained folded in my lap. I felt heat rise through my chest, but my voice came out calm. "Aegis performs regulated environmental response," I said. "We handle infection control failures, hazardous exposure, flood contamination, and clean room recovery. Last year, our revenue exceeded $18 million. Meredith's smile disappeared. My father gave a low whistle as though I had offered an entertaining exaggeration. "Revenue is not profit," he announced. "I watch business television." Another scattered laugh passed through the room, weaker this time. "Our net margin was healthy," I replied. "We reinvest most of it in safety equipment, training, insurance, and expansion." Chloe shifted in her chair. "Grace, this is my engagement dinner. You do not need to turn it into a sales presentation." I answered a question about my work. You answered it with a financial report. Because every ordinary description gets replaced by your family joke. Diane placed a hand over mine. From across the room, the gesture probably looked maternal. Up close, her fingers pressed hard enough to command silence. "Sweetheart, no one is insulting you," she said. "We are simply keeping things in perspective." I slowly withdrew my hand. Whose perspective? The one where Chloe's title deserves 3 lines in the program, but 126 employees become a joke? The room went quieter. Chloe's expression hardened. She knew I had noticed the biography card. "You are making this much more dramatic than it is." I reached for my phone and opened the group chat screenshots, not because I intended to expose them immediately, but because I needed the proof in front of me. Chloe saw the familiar photograph on the screen. Her face changed. "What are you doing with that?" she asked. "Reading the joke." Meredith whispered Chloe's name, warning her without words. Chloe pushed back her chair. "That was a private conversation." "Private does not mean harmless." "Are you seriously going to create a scene over some messages between friends?" "You created the scene when you made me the entertainment before I even arrived." My father told me to lower my voice. I had not raised it. Diane said family members teased one another and that mature adults understood the difference between cruelty and humor. "Humor usually involves everyone laughing," I said, "not one person being trained to smile while everyone else laughs at her." Chloe stood. "Fine. You want applause? Congratulations. You employ janitors. That does not make you some kind of surgeon." Ethan turned toward her sharply. A physician at the neighboring table stopped speaking. One of Robert's hospital administrators set down his fork. Chloe heard the ugliness of her own sentence only after it reached the room, but instead of correcting it, she lifted her chin. "I am just saying there are levels of responsibility." "There are," I replied. "My teams enter contaminated rooms before doctors and nurses can return. They manage chemicals that can scar lungs, pathogens that can kill vulnerable patients, and air systems that can spread infection across entire hospital wings. They carry responsibility every time they seal a respirator." "You are proving my point," Chloe said. "Everything has to become a heroic speech. Only because you keep reducing skilled workers to a punchline." Diane stepped between us and said I was jealous because Chloe's engagement had brought the family together. My father added that I had always been too sensitive about my little business. I looked around the tables and saw people waiting to learn whether I would obey. I thought about walking out. Leaving would protect me from the next insult, but it would also allow my family to rewrite the night before dessert. By morning, they would say I had become jealous, unstable, or unable to celebrate my sister. Silence had never protected me. It had only protected their version of me. I turned back toward Chloe. "When did honest work become shameful to you? Before or after you learned it could pay for the life you display?" Diane's face hardened immediately. "Do not bring money into this." The warning carried more fear than authority. Chloe heard it too. A brief current of uncertainty passed between them. "What money?" she asked. Diane ignored her. My father lifted both hands and told everyone I had always struggled with comparison. He said I should sit down, stop exaggerating, and remember that the evening belonged to Chloe. I stared at the floral arch, the monogrammed menus, the rented glass house, and the people who had watched my family turn my labor into dinner entertainment. Then I noticed Evelyn. She was no longer looking at Chloe, my parents, or the other guests. She was staring at the silver shield pin on my dress. Her expression changed from curiosity to shock. She stood so quickly that her chair struck the stone floor and fell backward. Robert said her name, but she did not answer. She crossed the room, stopped inches away from me, and studied my face. "The respirator," she murmured. "The emergency calls. That pin." Her eyes filled as recognition settled completely. "It was you." She leaned closer, her voice breaking, and whispered 3 words. "You saved us." My mother's face turned white. My father slowly lowered his wineglass. Chloe looked from Evelyn to me, and for the first time that evening, she understood that she had humiliated me in front of the one family who already knew exactly what my work was worth. No one laughed after that. Evelyn kept one hand on my forearm as if she needed to confirm I was real. Robert rose more slowly, his expression shifting from confusion to recognition. "Aegis," he said. "You are Grace Holloway from Aegis." I nodded. The non-disclosure agreement still limited what I could say, but Evelyn was not bound from discussing her own experience. She turned toward the room. 6 months ago, Our flagship oncology center discovered fungal contamination above a transplant wing. The first contractor told us it was contained. Grace refused to sign the clearance. She found spores inside the air handling system and traced them to a construction defect that had been hidden behind a wall. Her voice tightened. 42 immunocompromised patients were scheduled to enter that wing. My husband was one of them. A murmur moved across the tables. Robert touched the edge of his jacket near the scar from his transplant port. Until that moment, I had not known he had been among the patients. Evelyn continued. Grace shut down the wing even when several executives pressured her to keep the opening date. She brought in crews overnight, built containment zones, and stayed on site until independent testing cleared every room. That delay cost us money. It may also have saved my husband's life. She looked directly at my parents. Calling her a cleaning lady is like calling a firefighter someone who carries a hose. My father's mouth opened, but nothing came out. Diane tried to recover first. We are incredibly proud of Grace, she said. Families tease. You know how it is. Evelyn's expression cooled. No. I know what gratitude looks like. That was not it. Chloe stood, her chair scraping against the floor. This is being blown completely out of proportion. I made one joke. Ethan asked quietly. One? I unlocked my phone and placed it beside his plate. The group chat screenshots filled the screen. The mop emoji, the comments about my hands, the joke about free wedding service, my mother's message, my father's reply, Chloe's laughing reaction. Ethan scrolled without speaking. Chloe reached for the phone, but he moved it away. You told me your sister skipped family events because she resented your career, he said. You never said your family treated her like this. Diane interrupted. That chat was private. So was the contempt, I replied. Until you served it with dinner. At the far end of the table sat Allison Pierce, a senior partner at Vail and Mercer and Chloe's direct supervisor. Chloe had spent months positioning herself to lead the firm's bid for the Whitmore Foundation's new public health campaign. Allison had been smiling through most of the evening. Now she looked sick. Evelyn turned to her. Is this the team proposing to represent our worker safety initiative? Allison set down her glass. Chloe is one member of the team. She publicly mocked hazardous response employees, hospital sanitation workers, and her own sister's staff, Evelyn said. Our campaign is built around dignity for frontline labor. I cannot place that message in the hands of someone who believes those workers are punchlines. Chloe's face lost color. Mrs. Whitmore, please. My private family dynamic has nothing to do with my professional judgment. It has everything to do with judgment, Evelyn replied. Public relations is not the art of hiding character. It is the practice of communicating it. Allison asked Chloe to speak with her on Monday before any further work on the proposal. Chloe's promotion, the account, and perhaps her position were suddenly uncertain. She looked at me as though I had engineered the collapse. I had not arranged any of it. I had simply stopped absorbing the consequences for other people. Robert then addressed me in front of the entire room. Whitmore Regional Medical, he said, had completed its independent review of Aegis's emergency response. Their board had approved negotiations for a 5-year environmental safety contract covering all 14 hospitals, subject to final terms. The projected value was $12 million in the first 2 years, with expansion options beyond that. He had planned to contact me the following week. After tonight, he said, I am even more certain we chose the right company. Met. My mother gripped the back of her chair. My father stared at the table. Chloe's eyes filled, but I did not feel triumphant yet. Revenge is rarely one clean explosion. Sometimes it is the slow return of every truth someone buried, each one arriving with its own receipt. And the largest receipt had not reached the table. Diane pulled me toward the side of the room and hissed that I had ruined Chloe's engagement dinner. I looked at the woman who had introduced humiliation as entertainment and asked, which part did I ruin? The joke, The lie, or the moment people stopped believing both? She insisted the family had always supported me. Martin finally found his voice and said they had even helped me start Aegis. "You gave me $500 for my first equipment trailer," I said. "Then you asked for it back 3 weeks later because Chloe needed a deposit on an apartment." Chloe stared at him. "You told people you invested in her company?" My father shrugged. "Parents help children. Details get fuzzy." "Not bank details," I said. I opened a folder stored on my phone. 2 weeks earlier, my accountant had been reconciling personal loans before year-end and flagged $48,000 I had transferred to my parents over 18 months. Diane had requested the money in 3 emergencies: my father's cardiac rehabilitation deductible, storm damage to their roof, and a temporary mortgage shortage. Then, an invoice arrived in my email by mistake from Crescent Image Partners, a firm that built executive brands for corporate clients. The invoice listed Chloe as the client and my mother as the payer. $27,500 of my roof money had funded Chloe's media coaching, wardrobe consulting, and professional launch campaign. Another $12,000 had covered the conservatory deposit for the engagement dinner. The remainder had paid my father's country club dues and only a fraction of the medical bill. I displayed the invoices on the conservatory's presentation screen. I showed dates, amounts, vendor names, and the messages Diane had sent me on those same days. "Your father's health cannot wait. The ceiling is leaking over our bed. We have nowhere else to turn." Each plea sat beside the actual payment it had financed. Chloe's voice dropped. "You paid for my campaign?" "I paid for it without being told." Diane began to cry, but even her tears were arranged around Chloe. "We only wanted to give your sister a fair start." "A fair start with money you took from the daughter you called unambitious?" The question silenced her. How many times can favoritism be renamed love before someone admits it is theft? I had spent years believing my parents simply understood Chloe better. The records proved something uglier. They understood my reliability so well that they had converted it into a resource. My labor was embarrassing in public and useful in private. Ethan removed the engagement ring box from beside Chloe's place setting. He did not ask for the ring on her hand, and he did not end their relationship in front of an audience. He said something more serious. "We are pausing the wedding plans until I know what is true." Chloe protested that she had not known where the money came from. I believed part of that. But Ethan asked whether she had ever wondered how her parents suddenly afforded the campaign, the venue, or the lifestyle they claimed. Not knowing because the truth might inconvenience you is still a choice. Allison informed Chloe that she was removed from the Whitmore proposal effective immediately and would be placed on administrative leave pending an ethics review. 2 of Diane's closest friends, women who had applauded every comparison between her daughters, moved their seats to another table. My father tried one final joke about family drama becoming expensive. No one laughed. I did not demand groveling. I demanded correction. Diane and Martin had to tell every guest that Aegis was a specialized emergency response company, that they had misrepresented my work for years, and that they had used my money to fund Chloe while claiming to support me. Chloe had to acknowledge the group chat, apologize to my employees, not only to me, and delete every photograph and comment that mocked them. I also required a written repayment agreement prepared by an attorney. Until those conditions were met, there would be no calls, holidays, loans, or access to my life. Diane asked whether I could really cut off my own family over one terrible night. "No," I said. "I am cutting you off over years of terrible choices. Tonight is only the night witnesses arrived." She faced the room with shaking hands. Martin stood beside her, suddenly smaller without laughter to hide behind. Chloe joined them last. Their apologies were imperfect, defensive in places, and painfully public. I did not rescue them when their voices faltered. They had never rescued me from the shame they created. When they finished, Evelyn did not applaud. Neither did I. Accountability is not a performance that earns instant forgiveness. It is the first payment on a debt, and theirs had only begun. 4 months later, I stood inside Aegis's new training center while our first class practiced building a negative pressure containment chamber. On the wall behind them hung the 5-year Whitmore Regional Medical Contract, signed for an initial value of $12.4 million. It allowed us to open 2 response hubs, hire 48 people, and create a paid certification program for custodial workers moving into regulated environmental safety. I named the program Second Shield because people whose work is treated as invisible often become the first protection everyone depends on. The consequences from the engagement dinner did not disappear when the tables were cleared. Vale and Mercer's ethics review found that Chloe had used company devices for several mocking messages and had misrepresented her role on the Whitmore proposal. She lost the promotion and resigned 2 months later. Ethan postponed the wedding indefinitely. They remained together, but only after he required complete financial transparency and counseling before discussing marriage again. My parents sold their country club membership and my father's vintage car to make the first repayment. Diane's social circle became much quieter after the women she had tried to impress learned that her polished family image had been financed by the daughter she mocked. They apologized again in writing. This time, the letters contained no excuses. Chloe visited the Aegis Training Center and spent a full day listening to technicians describe hospital outbreaks, chemical burns, overnight deployments, and the fear of bringing contamination home to their children. She later recorded a public apology to the workers she had ridiculed. I accepted the apology as an action, not as a reset button. Trust did not return because she finally understood my resume. It would return, if it ever did, through repeated honesty. My mother asked when I would come home for dinner. I told her I was not ready. My father complained that the boundaries felt like punishment. I answered that boundaries often feel cruel to people who benefited from your lack of them. For the first time, I did not soften the sentence afterward. I realized Evelyn's 3 words had not created my worth. You saved us. Only forced my family to confront a value that had existed before anyone wealthy confirmed it. I had been worthy when I slept on the office floor. I had been worthy when I wore work boots to stop contaminated water from reaching a patient's room. I had been worthy when my mother hid my business card and when my father turned my profession into a joke. Their recognition arrived late. My dignity had been there all along. So what is the lesson? Honest labor does not become respectable only when it produces millions. A family that favors one child teaches both children the wrong thing. One learns to shrink, and the other learns that admiration is an entitlement. Standing up for yourself may not preserve the version of peace everyone prefers, but peace built on your silence is only obedience with better manners. And forgiveness without accountability is not kindness. It is permission. If your family only respects you after someone more powerful validates you, did they ever respect you at all? If they profit from your sacrifice while mocking the path that produced it, how long are you required to call that love? I cannot answer those questions for anyone else. I can only tell you what I chose. I stopped auditioning for a place in my own family. I built a life where my work, my employees, and my self-respect were not subjects for debate. And when I walked past the framed Whitmore contract each morning, I did not see revenge. I saw a receipt proving that the woman they called the cleaning lady had been the one holding everything together, and she had finally stopped cleaning up their mess.
Thank you for supporting our channel and watching the story. This fictional video was created only for entertainment, education, and dramatic reflection. We hope it reminds you that someone else's betrayal may explain your pain, but it does not have to decide your identity. You can be hurt and still become wise, gentle, confident, and free.